There is a stretch of road in Wyoming Territory where the wind comes down off the mountains in April like it has an errand, and I've spent a good part of my life collecting what happened along it. Most of what people hand me is smoke. Now and then, somebody hands me a thing that is true and heavy and worth the carrying. This is one of those. In the spring of 1882, a woman rode that road with bad news folded in her coat pocket, and she said 7 words to a waiting man that should have ended the whole business before it ever got started. You wanted a wife, not a wrangler. He did not argue with her. He did not take offense. He touched the brim of his hat like she had done him a kindness, and then he walked out to the corral and saddled a second horse, the gentle one he had brought in that morning for a bride who never came. Now, there was a reason he did that, and here is the part that still gets me. He did not know the reason himself. It was 3 winters old and buried under river ice, and neither one of them would dig it up until it was nearly too late to matter. So I am going to give you both halves, how she saved his land, and how she had already saved his life without ever learning his name. Stay for both. It is worth your time. The stage stop at Antler was one long building with a sod roof and a bench out front, and Colton Renner had been sitting on that bench since a little after 7 in the morning. He had brushed his hat. He had gotten his boots wet and then dried them by the stove so the mud would come off clean. He had a folded letter in his breast pocket that he had read enough times to have worn the creases soft, and in it a woman named Mabel Tilden had written that she was of good health and cheerful temper and would come west on the April stage, and that she hoped he would not find her too plain in person. He had spent a week trying to think of how a man answers a line like that without sounding like a fool. He had written the notice himself, 4 lines of it in a Council Bluffs paper, a homestead with good water and a safe claim, honest work, a man who did not drink, and he had been proud of the word safe when he set it down. The stage came in at noon, and it brought a drummer with a case of buttons, a widow bound for Casper, and a crate of window glass. It did not bring Mabel Tilden. Colton stood there a while after the team was unhitched. There is a particular way a man stands when he is deciding whether to be embarrassed in front of strangers, and he was doing it in the open, in the middle of the yard, with the whole stop watching him out of the corners of their eyes. Then he heard a horse coming in from the north, off the trail rather than the road, and he turned. She rode in on a mud-leg buckskin with a coil of rope on her saddle and a canvas coat the colour of dishwater, and she did not swing down until she had looked him over, the same way a person looks over a horse at auction, from the boots up. "You would be Renner," she said. "I would. Greta Ivers." She got down and let the reins hang. "Mabel Tilden is my cousin. She is not on that stage, and she is not coming." She got as far as Rock Springs, heard a man in the depot say the North Range up here was being jumped and that a woman had no business on it, and she turned around and bought a ticket back to Omaha. She asked me to tell you. She did not have the nerve to write it. The drummer with the buttons had stopped pretending not to listen. Colton took that in, and he took in the way she stood with her weight over her heels, like a person who could go either direction fast. "You rode out here to tell me that," he said. "I rode out here to tell you 2 things," Greta said. "That is the first. The second is that the man in the depot was not wrong. I came down your north line 3 days ago on my way to the bar cross, and there are stakes out of the ground on your creek section. Not fallen. Pulled and reset, 40 rods east of where they belong, and set with a fresh maul. Somebody is walking your water off your map." She paused, and then she said the thing that the whole country would be repeating by summer. "So, you advertised for a wife on safe land. You wanted a wife, not a wrangler, and you have got neither, and your land is not safe. I want you to sit with what most men would have done there. Most men, humiliated in a yard full of strangers by a woman in a wet coat, would have found something ugly to say." Colton Renner tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am," he said, "you rode 2 days out of your way to hand a stranger news that made you no money and cost you a shoe on that horse. That is more than my intended managed." He looked at the buckskins off 4, which was, in fact, missing a shoe. "Will you tell me what else you saw on my fence line, and will you do it inside where there is coffee? Because I have got a feeling I'm going to want to be sitting down." They sat at the plank table in the corner, while the stop-woman poured, and Greta drew his north section on the tabletop with a wet fingertip, and Colton went grey around the mouth, because here is what she was drawing on, and here is the clock that had been running under all of it. Colton Renner had come into that country in 1877 and put his name on 160 acres of grass, with a creek through the north end of it, and under the law a man had 5 years to live on his ground and improve it, and then go before the land office and prove up. He had his 5 years in June. He had his witnesses lined up, men who would swear to his cabin and his fence and his crop. What he did not have was a single day to spare, and everything on that homestead lived or died on the creek. Grass without water in that country is a picture of grass. He had built his corrals to it, run his ditch off it, watered 400 head off it in a dry August. And if a man could get his name in front of Colton's on the creek section, then Colton had 160 acres of very handsome nothing. "Who wants it?" Greta said. "There is a land agent named Dorsey Mallory keeps an office in town," Colton said. "Files claims for men who never intend to live on them. Locates settlers for a fee and then locates somebody else on top of them for another fee. He has been out twice this year to talk to me about my water in a friendly manner." "How friendly?" "He offered me $300 and called it a favor." Greta turned her cup around on the plank once. Then she stood up and picked her hat off the bench. "You are going to need to ride that whole line and count what is missing," she said. "And you cannot count it and drive it back alone before June." "No," Colton said, "I cannot." "Then I am going to want to borrow a horse because mine is walking on 3 shoes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went out to the corral and saddled that second horse, the one he had brought in for a bride, and he did not make a speech about it, and that was the whole of the arrangement they ever made. They rode the line for 11 days. I've talked to 2 men who were on the Renner place that spring, and they both told me the same thing in almost the same words, which is that they had every intention of not liking her. The first morning she went down the fence with a maul and a plumb bob made out of a lead sinker on a string, and she found where the pulled stakes had been redriven, and she did not just knock them out. She dug out the packed dirt with her hands until she found the old hole, the true one, and she set the stake back in the ground it came from and tamped it, and cut a blaze in the nearest cottonwood at the same height every time, so a man could stand at any one stake and sight the next. The oldest hand on the place was a Tennessean named Ferris, who had ridden for Colton since the first winter, and had opinions about women on ranges. He watched her do 4 of them. Then he got off his horse and started digging out the 5th. That afternoon they came on a heifer down in a wash with a swollen jaw, and Greta had her head up and roped and a bad tooth abscess lanced and flushed with salt water inside of 20 minutes, working from the ground with the rope dallied to her saddle horn, talking to the animal the entire time, in a low, flat voice like she was reading out a ledger. She stitched a hide tear on the same animal with a curved needle out of her own kit. She did not ask anybody to hold anything. And on the 4th day she got down off her horse at the creek crossing and squatted on her heels for a long while over nothing that anybody else could see, and then she said, "Same man twice. He is heavy on the outside of the right foot, and he has got a run-down heel, and he is wearing a town boot, not a work boot, and he came in from the east both times and led a second horse. He is not a cowhand. He is somebody's errand." Ferris said, out loud, "To nobody. Well, I will be." The days folded into each other the way work days do. They rode out at first light and came in at dark, and the cook fed them late, and after, there would be an hour on the porch step with the coffee going cold and the light dying blue over the bighorns. Colton mended a bridle. Greta whipped the ends of a lariat, working the waxed twine with her teeth and both hands. They did not talk much, and what they said was mostly about grass and water, and whether the creek would hold in August, and it was somewhere in that hour, on about the 9th evening, that Greta Ivers noticed she had stopped counting the days until she rode on. She had been a trail hand since she was 14. Her father had put her on a horse before he taught her to read, and she had built her whole life around not needing anybody, and not being needed too hard by anybody either, because that was the arrangement that let you go. She had never once in her life sat on a step at dusk and thought, "I would like tomorrow to look like today." It rattled her more than the claim jumper did. Dorsey Mallory came out on a Thursday in a buggy, which tells you most of what you need to know about the man. He had a soft grey hat and a soft grey manner, and he smiled at the ground before he said anything, as though the ground had agreed with him first. "Renner," he said, "I hear you have been busy on the north end. Resetting government stakes is a serious matter. A man could get himself in a good deal of trouble tampering with a survey." "I set them back where the survey put them," Colton said. "That is a question of fact, and fact is a slippery article." Mallory's eyes went over to Greta, who was standing at the buckskin's head with a hoof-pick in her hand, and had not said a word. "And who is this? I heard you had a bride coming, and I heard she got off the train and went home. This one for hire?" "That is a stray you have got working your fence, is what I heard," he added, when nobody helped him. "A hired stray. It does not look well, Renner. It does not look well at the land office, and it will not sound well at a hearing." Greta set the hoof down. She walked over until she was near enough to the buggy that Mallory's horse shifted, and she looked up at him, with an expression I am told was perfectly pleasant. "Mr. Mallory," she said, "your man wears a right boot with the heel run down on the outside, and he ties a slip loop that a child would be ashamed of. He has been at that creek twice. The second time he came in the dark and put a stake in a hole he had to dig fresh, which means the first hole is still there, which means the ground on that section is going to testify against you whether I do or not." She stepped back. "That is not an accusation. That is just what is out there in the dirt. You are welcome to ride up and look at it. Take the buggy." Mallory stopped smiling at the ground. He looked at her directly for the first time, and I am told his face did a thing that Ferris described as a man rearranging his furniture. "You will want to be gone from this country by June," he said, and then he turned the buggy. The letter from her father came the following week, forwarded twice, the envelope gone soft as cloth. Greta Ivers wrote the way he talked, which was seldom and to the point. The bar cross had held over its crew, and there was a place for her. Nathan Aldridge had come by the wagon twice asking after her, and had bought 2 sections on the Sweetwater and put up a frame house with a real stove in it. And he had asked Cade whether he might write to her direct, and Cade had told him that was Greta's business, and not his. And then, at the bottom, in the same flat hand, "You have never once asked me what to do, and I am not going to start guessing now. But a man will offer you an easy life about twice in your years, daughter, and you have turned down one already." She sat with that on the step for 2 evenings. On the third she borrowed the ink and wrote back 4 lines. She told him she was well. She told him the buckskin had thrown a shoe on the way up, and was shod again and sound. She told him to thank Mr. Aldridge, and to tell him plainly not to wait. And she told him that there was a man up here about to lose a creek to a thief with a pen, and that she was staying to fight for the Renner claim, and that she would explain the rest of it when she had figured out the rest of it herself. Mallory did not send another buggy. He did something much worse and much quieter. On the last Monday in May, he walked into the land office and filed a contest against the Renner entry, alleging abandonment and failure to cultivate, and alongside it, he entered a claim of his own to the creek section, dated and sworn to the 14th of March 1880, 2 years before, with an affidavit that he had held it by prior settlement all along, and that Renner's fences were an encroachment. A hearing was set before the Circuit Land Commissioner, Ansel Pryor, for the 8th of June. Colton read the filing out loud at the plank table in his own kitchen, twice, the second time slower, and when he was done he set it down and put both hands flat on either side of it. "He does not have to win," Greta said. "Does he?" "No," Colton's voice had gone very even. "He has to keep me from proving up in June. If the entry is under contest, I cannot make final proof. If I cannot make final proof, my 5 years run out and the ground goes back open, and there is one man in this county standing at the door with a filing already sworn out." He looked up. "It is not a lie he needs. It is a delay." "Then we do not argue with his paper," Greta said. "Paper against paper, he wins, because he writes better than we do, and he has been writing longer. We put a man on that creek with a maul in his hands, and we take the maul away from him. And if he does not come again?" "He will come," she said. "That filing says prior settlement. Prior settlement wants improvements on the ground and a boundary that agrees with the story. Right now, his boundary is sitting in my blaze marks where I put it back. He cannot walk into that hearing with his own stakes, 40 rods off from where he swore they were in 1880. He has got 9 days to move them and make it look old." She pulled her coat off the peg. "I will take the creek from now till the 8th. You keep your witnesses, and your ditch and your crop rows perfect, because if we win the stakes and lose the cultivation, he still eats you alive." Ferris rode the first 3 dawns with her, and saw nothing. On the 4th of those long cold mornings, the 2nd of June, with the light not yet up over the rim and frost still grey on the sage, Greta Ivers came over the cut bank on foot leading her horse, and found a man in a town boot, with a run-down heel, kneeling at the creek with a maul and 6 new stakes, weathering the tops of them with a wire brush and a handful of stove ash. She did not shoot at him. I want that understood, because the country told it that way for years, and the country was wrong. She stood up on the cut bank where he could see her, and she said, "You have got about 4 seconds to decide whether you want to be a witness or a defendant." And the man looked at her, and looked at the horse behind her, and then he ran for his own horse and left the ash bucket sitting in the grass. She let him go. Then she went down and did the patient thing, which is the thing that actually won it. She dug out every one of the 6 new stakes and kept the dirt and ash with them. She measured off the true corner and found the old hole underneath and made a note of the depth. She took the wire brush and the ash bucket. She bundled the 6 stakes and the brush together with a length of her own hard twist. And because her hands had been tying it since she was 9 years old, she tied it without thinking, the way her father tied everything he ever meant to hold. 2 cross turns and a crown laid over the top, and a second crown laid back the other way, a double crown hitch that a Missouri drover taught him in '64, and that almost nobody in that country used because it takes twice as long, and it never, ever slips. She rode in at 10 in the morning and set the bundle on the porch boards in front of Colton Renner. He looked at it. He did not say anything about the stakes or the ash or the man in the town boot. He got down on one knee on his own porch slowly, like a man whose leg had gone out from under him, and he put his hand on the knot. "Where did you learn to tie this?" he said. "My father." She was pulling her gloves off. "Why?" "Greta." He had never used her given name before. She stopped with one glove half off. "Where were you 3 winters ago in February?" "Coming up the Sweetwater with 1,100 head that we should not have been moving in February." "Why?" "Which ford?" "The lower one, below the bend." She said it slower, watching him. "Why?" "And this is the part I promised you, so let me set it down the way he finally told it, at the plank table, with the coffee going cold and neither one of them touching it. 3 winters before, on the 9th of February, Colton Renner had been a long way south of his own grass, trailing home 60 head of bred cows he had bought cheap off a broke outfit on the Sweetwater because he could not afford to sit and wait for spring prices. He had put his horse onto the ice at the lower ford chasing a bunch quitter, and the ice had let go under the horse's hind end, and he had gone into the water in a heavy coat. He got a forearm over the shelf, and the shelf broke. He got another, and it broke. He could not feel his legs, and then he could not feel his hands, and the current had his boots and was patiently pulling, and he had gotten to the place a man gets to where he stops fighting and starts apologizing to people who are not there. He remembered a voice from the bank. He remembered a loop coming out of nowhere and hitting the water past him and being dragged back into his chest, and a voice saying, "Get your arm through it," not shouting, just flat, the way you would tell somebody to pass the salt. He remembered the rope going hard and the ice coming apart under his ribs in sheets as he came up over it. He remembered lying on frozen gravel while somebody rolled him and got his wet coat off him and put a dry one over him, a long canvas coat that smelled of horse and wood smoke, and he remembered thinking he ought to look at the face and not being able to make his eyes do it. And when he came up out of the fever 4 days later at a road ranch with both feet still on him, all he had was the coat and a rope. Somebody had cut loose and left behind, still tied around the cottonwood at the head of the ford, in a knot he had never seen before in his life. 2 cross turns and a crown laid over and a second crown laid back the other way. He had ridden out there in the spring and cut the tree section out and carried it home. It was sitting on the shelf over his door. It had been sitting there for 3 years, next to a folded canvas coat he had never been able to give back to anybody because he had never been able to find out whose it was. Greta Ivers listened to the whole thing without moving. When he was done, she said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "You never opened your eyes for me. Not once. You were blue as a plum with river ice in your beard, and a man's face on frozen gravel is not the face he wears on his own porch, and I have sat across a supper table from you for a month and never seen it." She had to stop and start again. "There were 1,100 head of somebody else's cattle a mile behind me, and a man in the water in front of me. There was no time to make friends. I put you on the gravel, and I got a fire going in the willows, and I sent the Bailey boy back to the road ranch with a wagon, and I went on with the herd, because that was the job." She stopped. "I asked after you at Independence Rock in the spring. They said the man they hauled off the Sweetwater lived. That was all I ever knew, and I did not know your name, and you did not know mine, and we have been riding fence together for a month." "I have been keeping your coat by the door," Colton said, "for a stranger I could not name." Neither one of them said anything for a while after that, and I will tell you plainly, I do not think either of them slept much that night, and I do not think it was Mallory keeping them up. The hearing was held on the 8th of June in the front room of the land office, and 30 people came in and stood along the walls because the chairs ran out before 9 in the morning. Commissioner Ansel Pryor had been hearing land contests for 11 years, and had long since stopped being charmed by anybody. Mallory's lawyer laid it out beautifully. I have to give him that. He built a picture of a claim that had failed. He put Renner's cultivation at a scant few acres. He read out the advertisement for a wife and made the whole room understand that the bride had gotten one look at the situation and fled back east on the next train. And then he turned and pointed at Greta sitting in the second row in a clean shirt with her hat on her knee. And, in her place, he said, the claimant has produced a hired stranger, a woman off the trail with no interest in this land, no residence upon it, and no standing before this office, who has spent the last month pulling up government stakes on a section my client settled in 1880. The north section is abandoned in all but name, and it is Mallory's by prior filing. Pryor looked at Colton. Mr. Renner, you may answer. And Colton Renner stood up and did not talk about acres. That woman is not a hired stranger, he said. On the 9th of February, 1879, I went through the ice at the lower Sweetwater Ford and I was drowning. And a stranger I never got a look at put a rope on me and hauled me out and left me a coat and went on with the herd without so much as a name. I have kept that coat by my door for 3 years. 6 days ago that same woman set a bundle down on my porch, tied in the same knot, and it is not a knot anybody in this country uses, and the length of rope that pulled me out of that river is still tied around a cottonwood at the head of that ford, and any man here is welcome to ride up and look at it. He turned and looked at Mallory for the first time. She has got no interest in my land, that is true. She never has had. That is exactly why you ought to believe every word she is about to say. Then Greta stood up, and she did not raise her voice, and she took it apart with both hands. She put the 6 ash-rub stakes on the table with the fresh dirt still on them, and the wire brush beside them. She gave the depth of the new holes and the depth of the old, and she gave the distance, 40 rods east, and she said any man with a chain could walk it that afternoon. She described the boot. Then she asked the clerk to read out the date on Mallory's own sworn filing, and the clerk read it, the 14th of March, 1880. And she said, Mr. Pryor, that filing swears his corner runs to the section marker on the east bank. That marker was set by the deputy surveyor's crew in the fall of 1881. It is stamped with the year. He swore in March of 1880 to a stone that would not exist for another 18 months. She let that sit. And I would ask the register what day of the week the 14th of March 1880 fell on, and whether this office was open on a Sunday. It was a Sunday. The office had not been open. There is no sound, quite like 30 people in a small room all deciding something at once. Pryor read the filing himself, front and back, twice. Then he took off his spectacles and looked of all people at Greta. Miss Ivers, one question, and it is not a legal one, so you may decline it. Do you mean to stay in this country? Greta Ivers had spent 19 years arranging her life so that the honest answer to that question would always be no. I do, she said. Pryor put his spectacles back on. He dismissed the contest against the Renner entry for want of any credible evidence of abandonment. He held Mallory's claim to the creek section void as fraudulently antedated, ordered it stricken, ordered him off the ground by sundown, and referred the whole affidavit to the district attorney for perjury. Dorsey Mallory went out through 30 people who did not move aside for him any quicker than they had to, and he was gone from the county before the grass browned, and I am told he did not go into land after that. Colton Renner made final proof on the 20th of June, with Ferris and a neighbour swearing to his cabin, his fence, his ditch, and his crop. They were married in the ranch yard in September, with the cook's good tablecloth on a plank, and about 60 people standing in the grass, and Cade Ivers rode up from the Sweetwater to give away a daughter he had long ago given up expecting to hand to anybody. There was no minister to be had closer than 40 miles, so they got one from Buffalo and fed him for 2 days. And when it was done, Colton took down the folded canvas coat that had been sitting on the shelf over his door for 3 years, next to a cut section of cottonwood with a rope still knotted around it, and he put it around her shoulders in the middle of her own wedding, and it fit her, because it always had. She wore it working that winter. It is a plain thing, that coat, the colour of dishwater, and she wore it out and patched it twice and wore it out again, and the piece of cottonwood with the double crown hitch stayed on the shelf over the door for the rest of both their lives, and their children grew up thinking every house had one. That is the whole of it, both halves, the way I promised, the land and the life. And if you have got the evening free, stay a while, and I will tell you another one, because the fire is not going anywhere and neither am I.